October. We are near the end of October, but we are at just the beginning of the 2024 election cycle, which really starts in 2023 in earnest. And with us here tonight, we are very fortunate to have with us Dave Darnell. Sorry, Dave Darnell's my usual co-host. Dave Darnell.
Well, I know Dave Darnell, so he's a fine gentleman. Anyone with the first name of Dave, they're doing something right in life. So
that's right. We got some great Daves involved with what we do here, and I'm used to a bunch of Kevins too. You turn around, you say Kevin, and 5 people turn around. It's a thing in the party out here.
Yeah.
But I'm just thrilled to have you here tonight with us, Dave. And Dave is a political media consultant with Go Big Media, and also has worked on the 2020 Trump War Room, as well as further into the past, very involved in Oregon politics quite directly as part of the State House caucus efforts. Dating, I guess we're dating ourselves a little bit, going back about 10 years, but then also involved with campaigns here in Oregon ever since. You've always kept that connection, but you've also got the Louisiana background here, which is very relevant for our first big topic here tonight, which is that we have a new House Speaker as of the end of last week, and he is an LSU Tigers fan. That was actually part of the headlines that came out.
We were very excited. I made sure to rock my LSU hat tonight while we were chatting. So go Tigers. Let's start with that. But yeah, no, it's really fascinating. For the political nerds listening, this is obviously the first time Louisiana has had a Speaker of the House as a part of their congressional delegation. But what people might not know beyond that is that in Louisiana, there's always been rumored to be a curse amongst congressmen in Louisiana that tried to run for House Speaker. Somewhat famously, some of your listeners may know this, Hale Boggs was the majority leader. He was a Democrat from Louisiana in the 1970s. He was destined to be the next House Speaker. Died mysteriously in a plane crash, like where the plane was never found in Alaska, and I think it was in 1972.
Wow.
Next one was Bob Livingston. This is a congressman from the 90s that actually became the speaker designee, was voted by the conference. But then right after he was voted by the conference, he kind of got mired in some scandal and had to step down from the speakership. And I think from there, that's when Newt Gingrich became the speaker. And then after that, next one that was kind of in line was Steve Scalise, who, obviously had a lot of issues prior to running for speaker in terms of being almost fatally shot and things of that nature.
Bernie Sanders supporter type.
Bernie Sanders supporter type. And then obviously just fell short. So when I saw that Scalise didn't get it, I was like, well, the curse continues. Yet here's Mike Johnson, LSU grad. He's now Speaker of the House. So as a Louisiana man, pretty excited to see that. And yeah, we'll see if maybe we can get some good food in the cafeteria now on the Hill. Should you guys actually cook a thing or two?
Some serious gumbo, maybe.
Right.
I think you can probably make some specific suggestions to that effect. I would guess.
Absolutely. That's a different show for a different time, but I could definitely wax gumbo all night if y'all wanted me to.
Well, and I remembered him because it's hard to remember the faces and the backgrounds of 435 members of the House of Representatives, and then you got 100 members of the Senate. But I remembered him because I remember seeing him during, I think it was the impeachment hearings. Certainly it was Judiciary Committee, which I think was used for that. And he was one of the guys that asked really good questions and sounded very reasonable and persistent. And of course, he's a lawyer, is his background prior to joining Congress. So my immediate feeling was, oh, this is good. He's a sharp guy. And then I saw him interviewed by Sean Hannity last week after the vote took place. And he sounded like he just jumped right into the role. Like, some people have a learning curve. He didn't. He was right there. He knew what to say.
Yep.
and it was just all off the cuff, right? He had like less than 24 hours to prepare for what was, I think, almost a 40-minute interview or something to that effect, and he was great.
Especially for someone that 25 days ago, I don't think any of us would have thought Congressman Mike Johnson would be a speaker. And to be clear, 25 days ago, I don't think Mike Johnson thought he was going to be Speaker of the
No,
House.
no,
Right?
that's right.
So there's a lot of learning that has to get done fast for someone that obviously had ambitions. He was making his way up through the conference. He was a vice chair of the GOP conference, so certainly a member of leadership. But pretty far removed from being the speaker. So for someone that has a lot to learn about what it means to be a speaker and kind of how to lead a conference that, let's be honest, certainly has its moments where it's not always united.
Yeah.
He's got his work cut out for him, and so far, he seems to be doing the things necessary to try to unite that conference, which is exciting.
Yeah, and what I liked also was that there was a unanimous vote. Like, the conference did come together and
Mhm.
decide, okay, this is it. We're getting behind him and we're going to make this work, which is ultimately how it's supposed to work, is that you're supposed to be able to produce unity out of what was clearly, at times not exactly unity. But now we can switch the focus back, right? We can actually start to focus on a Republican agenda of what things we want to accomplish and do. All these spending bills and tax bills have to have their origin in the House of Representatives. And also, there's a lot of heavy issues that are waiting out there to be addressed. And now they're going to be addressed. And we're going to switch the spotlight back onto Joe Biden and the Democrats, who frankly have made a big mess of things. And that's a focus.
Right, right. And obviously, I mean, it seems pretty clear they're getting back to business pretty fast. I know this week they've got a few different things. Obviously, the Israeli package, which is offset with cuts to the IRS, I think is up for a vote on Wednesday. I think a censorship of Tlaib, which is more than past due in terms of just her heinous
Oh,
comments
yeah.
about the Israeli Palestinian conflict. So glad to see that they're going to take her to the woodshed a little bit. There's just a lot of work that has to get done, and I think that's one of the things that I think it's fair to say this GOP conference is really focused on is doing substantive work. Not just doing stuff that makes headlines and makes for good tweets, but actually doing things that are for the betterment of the American people as a whole. That is something that I think is important about, even when you just control one chamber in one branch of the government as a party, being able to show the American people, listen, this is our agenda, this is what we're trying to do. That's super, super important. It seems like that's what they're really starting to focus on this week.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned about Tlaib because her own conference, the Democrat caucus, they won't do anything about her. Even Nancy Pelosi and others kind of made it excuses for her. They're like, well, we support Israel, but we're not going to say anything about somebody who's literally claiming that that Israel bombed a hospital that they didn't. And then I was very gratified, by the way, to see X, or Twitter as you know it, taking the New York Times to the woodshed recently too, for much the same thing. Stuff that we kind of gave up hope that this would even happen, but it does matter when you take a stand, and this is a great way to start. It's like, we're going to get concrete things accomplished, but we're also going to say that this is wrong for her to go around claiming fake news and actually causing disruption and unrest in the Middle East, not to mention here.
That's absolutely right. And even bigger than that, I think that, and I don't consider myself an expert in foreign policy. I know enough to get by, but I will say, Israel as one of the lone democracies in that part of the world, it is important as for the United States as a leading democracy, the leading democracy, to support not just an ally, but a form of government that we know has proven time and time again is better for the people of the world, which is a democratic society, which is what Israel has, and that's something that I feel sometimes gets lost in this conversation because there's so many atrocities that are going on, and the things that Hamas are doing, which are absolutely despicable and terrible. Things they're doing with kids, hostages, all of that is just absolutely awful. And for anyone to side with that is just inhumane and inexcusable, in my opinion. But then there is this bigger sort of geopolitical conversation about, listen, we have to make sure that democracy is protected across the world. That's not saying that America should be the world police, but when we have a friend in trouble, we need to be the type of friend that has their back. And I think that's what the United States is doing. That's what this package is about later this week. That's all extremely important.
Yeah, there's several things that I think are going to be moving forward, and then some other things that are already moving forward that the momentum is going to continue on. So, we're going to have an actual debate. That's what we do in this country, right? We have a debate, people have different points of view, and then we find common ground sufficient in the legislative bodies to advance legislation or spending bills, et cetera. And there are spending bills that are moving forward. I believe we just got a breaking news that President Biden he's threatening to veto Republican spending bills. It's kind of like I don't know that they've passed the Senate yet, but it's like he's just threatening to veto them. So ultimately, by doing the right thing and then actually putting it through the legislative process, we're going to come forward with some things. You mentioned one of them, which is that we're going to have cuts in this massive spending increase for the IRS to offset what we're going to be spending to support our foreign policy that is a priority for the country. And I think this is the kind of stuff that puts it puts the onus on the Democrats and the president to start paying attention to what that vote meant last fall when the power over the House of Representatives changed.
Right. No, I completely agree. Completely agree.
And I think there's also one of the first things that came out was about impeachment and the investigation that's going on in the House. That's going to continue forward. And I kind of liked what Speaker Johnson said. He didn't say it he said this is nothing personal. It's just that the things that we're investigating kind of look like they're very likely impeachable offenses. So we're going to get to the bottom of them, and we're not stopping. And that is something that I know matters to Republicans, but I think it matters to everybody. And every day there's a new headline about President Biden.
For sure. I mean, look, someone as someone that was extremely involved in the 2020 election, working for President Trump's campaign, one of the most grotesque things that happened was the Hunter Biden laptop story being absolutely blacked out by the media, being called disinformation. We obviously found out that it wasn't disinformation at all. Hunter Biden had actually left his laptop at a repair shop in Delaware. All this stuff is true. And there are some really legitimate questions that come from that. And that's part of what Congress is set to do by the Constitution, is to be literally, we learned this in third, fourth grade civics, it's to be a check and a balance on the executive. Well, here we have an executive, in the White House that did some very questionable things with his authority or former authority as vice president. Basically, making money off of his office or the office that he had. That's not what we want in leaders. And if it's true, it needs to be uncovered by Congress. So completely support that. I think it makes complete sense to do an investigation like that. And my guess is that there's some really bad stuff that we'll see that comes out in the near future. We've already seen some already.
Some of the stuff is just jaw dropping. These are like daily headlines. And these are headlines that have come out long after they launched this investigation. So there was already enough information to say that it was important to get to the bottom of this. But it turns out and this is maybe the worst thing of all. There was an investigation going on in 2016. I believe it was led by a prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, who he recently told the House Judiciary Committee, which we'd only know this because the House actually continues its investigation, that the FBI actually kept the existence of the Hunter Biden laptop, whose contents they verified, from U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, who was investigating the bribery allegations that involve the Biden campaign, the Biden family. And he said that at the time they had judged that there was enough credible evidence to further investigate, and that was blocked by others within the FBI and the DOJ. But they didn't even tell him about the laptop. And there were 40 informants that had given them information. Like, if you wanted an informant, you'd want 1 or 2 or 3 really good ones. They had 40.
Right. No, look, I mean, there's a lot of smoke out there in terms of where this investigation, and you could even argue that there's some fire too. I have no doubt that the Congress is going to uncover more. They were already in the process of doing that. They've uncovered more than what we were led to believe was actually real in 2020. I don't think they're done. And I think at the end of the day, what we really saw with what has been the weaponization of the U.S. government and to the benefit of one political party over another. And that's a bigger issue that we really have to address as a country moving forward is, our DOJ, the FBI, they should be going after bad guys and criminals and focus on that sort of stuff. They shouldn't be, sort of bought refs in political politics or against political parties. Like, that's, to me, like, it's a bridge too far. And it's like each party is set to a different set of rules, and that's getting a little out of hand, which is why this investigation is really important.
Yeah, and I think if you do know that something is true that can affect an election, and then you lie about it, what are the consequences? It's like stealing an election. Is if you lie about something that's enough to alter the outcome of an election. President Biden looked straight at the camera during a debate and said, the laptop, Hunter Biden laptop, that's Russian disinformation and a QAnon conspiracy theory and all this stuff. It was a lie. And I just wonder, we should hold these guys ultimately accountable at the ballot box, but we should be entitled to the full and uninhibited information about what happened.
Well, I'm going to break some news on your show tonight, and I hope that no one's too shocked. Politicians lie.
Yeah, but they often dismiss it as so what? It's
that is, but that is just a truth in politics. Probably going back to Athens when we first made first democracies in the world.
Yeah,
we probably had politicians that lie. Politicians lie. Gravity is gravity, right? Mm. The big problem is that when politicians do lie, there should be the fifth estate or the media that are researching those and really calling balls and strikes fairly. Yeah. And when those lies result in criminal transgressions, if they do, then it's important that you have a judicial branch or you have an executive branch that is executing those laws properly. And that's where I think the system is broken, where we have a news media that just isn't going after certain politicians with the same vigor as they are other politicians. I'll let your viewers decide which ones I'm talking about when I say it that way. And we also, unfortunately, now have gotten even worse than that, where we now have law enforcement not enforcing the same laws or not approaching, not going after certain politicians for certain laws they broke. That part to me is the real problem. And that's one of the things, that's why this Republican conference, one of the first things that they did when they got power earlier this year was start a committee specifically to research the weaponization of government and try to curtail some of that. And we've seen some pushback in the private sector, like with X, formerly known as Twitter, doing some more to open up free speech and make sure that speech isn't blocked for purely political reasons. And so I think there's a lot of reason to be hopeful that this is going to be corrected, but there's still work to be done.
Yeah, and equal justice under the law is a fundamental principle of
Right.
what we understand to be America. It's also just a fundamental human principle of fairness. Uh, and eventually, if it's not corrected, it really does damage, real damage to the system that we count on to deliver justice and for people to have faith in the government. This is contrasted by the fact that we actually see things like presidents issued gag orders, former presidents rather, and also people that um, some people have charges filed against them while other people don't even get investigated for things that are maybe as bad or worse. This is, I mean, I would almost think that Hillary Clinton, if she weren't so partisan, would almost have to call out the fact that they went after her and investigated her, but they weren't doing it with Joe Biden, who has maybe done something far more egregious.
No, absolutely. And one of the things I'll changing subjects slightly, but it's kind of germane to what we're talking about. So as a media consultant, I deal with big tech a lot. We buy ads through Google for YouTube and things of that nature. And I'll give a specific example, and this might sound small, but it's not small to the folks that it affects. I'm working in a state right now where there's because of state laws, you're not legally allowed to run YouTube ads
Yeah.
for local elections specifically. You're not allowed to do that. So I worked for Republican candidates. We followed the law, didn't run any YouTube ads. Found out today our Democratic opponents are running YouTube ads when they're legally not allowed to.
Oh,
It's also against YouTube policy, or Google policy, I should say. Reached out to Google, crickets. Crickets. So, and this election it was about a week away now. It's November 7th. And
wow.
you have one set of rules for one political party, one set of rules for another. And then it may be a close enough election where that determines the outcome. Another simple issue. So I had ads flagged about a couple months ago. We were running YouTube ads, and we were talking about empowering parents and things like that. It wasn't a very controversial ad at all. The ad itself was pretty benign, if I'm being honest. But it was taken down from YouTube for violating Google's standards on pharmaceuticals, which was confusing to me. I was like, what pharmaceuticals? We don't even talk about pharmaceuticals in this ad. Well, it turns out, because every YouTube ad, when you run a YouTube ad, it has a click-through link. And typically what I do, if a candidate's running an ad, we'll go to their campaign website if you click on it. On their campaign website, one of the things that they talked about, and I'm saying this verbatim, is fighting the fentanyl epidemic. So having the words fighting the fentanyl epidemic, which again, I don't think that's a controversial statement. There's fentanyl pouring over the border. People are dying from it every day. We're not saying anything that's not in the news. But I was not allowed to run ads with that website because Google said, and then again, reached out to them, said, hey, listen, this seems like a pretty perverse, interpretation of your rules. No change. No change. When I know for a fact there are other Democratic candidates out there that are running ads that do talk about fentanyl.
Yeah, because some of them have changed their mind about that and decided it's actually bad, which has been, a trend you're starting to see across the country. That's a straight up First Amendment, situation where someone, or really
Sure.
selective campaign manipulation. So at that point, if there's a decider, and that's what I think is really concerning about this, is how, other than congressional hearings, uh, how else can one even get to the bottom of who made this decision? Because that sounds like a campaign contribution, is what it sounds like, by YouTube, in effect, or Google. And also, we always end up uh, having to approach these things like after the house is burned down and it's a total loss,
Right.
uh, someone goes and gets arrested. Well, that doesn't bring the house back. So
Right.
they, the barn door's open, the horse has gone away, and they're like, well, let's find out who opened that barn door. And then the penalty, if there ever is one, and there often isn't, is 30 lashes with a wet noodle.
No, it's absolutely right. And again, there's no rewinding the clock on elections. That's the thing. The true penalty is you either win or lose the election. If you win the election, you'll pay whatever fine you need to pay. You'll make any apology you need to make. Google may or may not decide to rehone their policies so they're a little more accurate or a little more fair. But that does nothing for the people that sacrificed and sometimes several years of their life to run for this office and fell just short. And I think for a lot of folks, they look at elections and they tend to think of big national elections, presidential or U.S. Senate, governor, Congress, which are usually decided by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of votes. But there's so many elections that are extremely important. Legislative elections are a great example, where a lot of times those are only determined by a few hundred votes.
Right.
And who knows when those types of rules aren't enforced evenly, if that has an effect. And there's no way for me to go, or anyone for that matter, to go measure, well, if we had been able to run this ad on YouTube for an extra 2 weeks, we would have gotten this 250 votes to flip it. There's never any empirical way to prove that as a fact.
No.
And there's no remedy for there's no do-over in American elections. You either won or you lost. And that part to me, as a professional that works in the industry, is extremely frustrating, because I want to play by the rules. I don't want to break the law. I don't want to do things that violate any terms or policies of any of our advertising partners. I certainly don't want to do anything that's against state statute or federal law. So when I play by the rules and then I see someone gets to color outside the lines and they're not taken, and not only are they not punished for it, but they're not stopped, it's extremely upsetting. And it's just not good for democracy when you just have this uneven playing field.
Yeah, and it causes people to lose confidence, lose faith in the system, which I don't know why there aren't more rapid and significant penalties for that. I don't think that we've caught up with the fact that things can be done quickly and information can be advanced rapidly and done in a way that you said is not a level playing field, and it can't be corrected, not in a reasonable amount of time. But speaking of coloring outside the lines and people not following the law, so it turns out that, there's a series of issues, right, that we're going to return to now that we have a speaker and now that we have a focus on what's going to be what's going on with the Biden administration, with the Democrats, and the 2024 election. There are issues like this headline today says illegal border crossers, the ones they know about, surpassed 10 million since Biden took office. The number totals more than the individual populations of 41 states. 10 million.
It's a hard number to wrap around. At this point, 10 million, it might as well be 20 million. It's a statistic at this point. It's hard for the human mind to fathom exactly how many people that is. Yeah. But it's telling that you see Biden, even if it's just a little bit of pandering, talking about trying to finish Trump's border wall. Even the Democrats understand, especially for border states, whether you're Texas or Arizona or even New Mexico, California, this is a huge issue. And this is an economic issue. It's a humanitarian issue. It's a drug issue because it's not just human beings that are coming across the border. It's fentanyl, like we just discussed, along with other
pharmaceutical issue.
Yeah, pharmaceutical issue. Yeah, I don't want to get your show flagged on YouTube for saying that. But no, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem, and it's a problem that is affecting everyday Americans in a lot of different ways. And it's also unfair to the people that are crossing who, honestly, for many of them, I do believe that these are hardworking people looking for a better way of life. But at the same time, they're given this false promise by the Biden administration that once they cross that imaginary line, everything's going to be okay. And that's just not the case. It's not the case at all. And so it's a massive problem. And, in terms of 10 million new members of our country, I don't know if members is the right word, but new inhabitants, I guess, is the word probably that makes the most sense. It's a catastrophe. And I think it's something that even now Democrats understand that they've just gone too far with this sort of open border policy.
Yeah, you've got mayors like in New York City, Eric Adams, pleading, saying, please do something about this. We can't have this anymore.
Right.
Of course, a lot of them want to have it both ways. Like, we're a sanctuary city and we're welcoming, but don't come here.
Right.
And it's not just New York, it's Chicago, it's a number of other cities. Well, I'm surprised they don't have more influence with somebody from their own party that happens to be in the White House, and assuming he's even running anything at this point.
Well, and I think in terms of this sort of open border policy the Democrats have embraced, I mean, really what they're doing is they're cowtailing to the most extreme members of their party, because this isn't even necessarily an ethnic issue. I mean, this is something. I mean, even amongst Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, and anyone, they understand that this is not a good way to conduct immigration policy in any country, let alone the United States.
No, there's Democrats that are representing border districts that are very much against what's happening because the towns in their districts are being overwhelmed and overrun,
right?
Like in Texas, and the president's not listening to them. Now, maybe they haven't done enough about it because talk is cheap. They could vote differently, but now. And that's just one of the issues, right? I mean, obviously we have some weighty foreign policy issues where we have to both have accountability, but also we have to take action when that's in the national interest. And then we've got things like our energy grid, which doesn't seem to have a lot of people making sure that it's functioning and stable and reliable and affordable. We just, in our state platform in Oregon, we just added a section to it last week that addressed energy because we thought it's time to start talking about whether you want to have it and you want to be able to afford it. And there's only one party that seems to be talking about that. And then there's another party that wants to give you something that isn't reliable, isn't affordable, as they take away the reliable and affordable options. And energy, if you think your life is difficult now, wait till you don't have energy.
Well, especially with, I mean, the news, China is, limiting its exports on, the rare minerals needed for like electric car batteries, things like that. It's one of the biggest myths when it comes to electric vehicles. A, it puts more work on your electric grid. Then B, it also makes us more dependent on China, who's the leading exporter of all electric car batteries in the world. I think it's something like 90% or 95% of all electric vehicle batteries come out of China.
Yeah.
We don't have, and then at the same time here in the United States, we're not doing more to invest in our harvesting or I guess mining of rare earth minerals and things like that. So we're forcing ourselves to be a net importer of a strategic resource, which is never a good spot for you to be from an economic standpoint or a foreign policy standpoint.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you got kids, Jewish students who are afraid to go to the kosher dining hall on campuses because of violent threats against them. There's serious things going on in this country that can and should be addressed. And there doesn't seem to be a level of seriousness from an entire political party on this. It's disconcerting. We also, in addition, have an economy that seemed to be overheating again at a time when they thought they were going to bring inflation under control. Mm-hmm. And yet you hear media spin, economy hot, doing well, except a lot of people say it's not so great.
It depends on who you're talking to. It was interesting. I think it was Delta Airlines that just kind of came out with their review of what their take on the upcoming or recession looks like. And what's interesting is that if you're in the top 40% of income earners in the United States, there really isn't a recession for you. Things are going pretty well, especially if you already own a home, you're locked in a low interest rate. But if you're in that bottom 40%, bottom 60%, that's where the recession is going to be felt the most and is being felt the most. Which again, you go back to what's said by the left and by the Biden administration and what is actually happening. You're seeing, because of their policies, it's lower income and middle income voters that are squeezed, or citizens, I should say, that are squeezed the most. Rich people are doing just fine. It's poor and middle class people that are struggling under the economic policies of Joe Biden. So it doesn't matter how great you tweet or how nice you sound at a press conference, when they do like a little weekend of Bernie's thing with Biden to make it look like he's lively and moving around. But the reality is that their policies are bad for the working poor and the middle class. And the numbers bear that out.
So much for the party of working people. You go on almost every Democrat's website and they brag about how they've been fighting for working people and families for how long. It's working people and families that are struggling with this. It's not hedge fund managers and Silicon Valley executives.
I mean, look, that might have been the Democratic Party of our parents and grandparents, but the reality is the Democratic Party today is fighting for the gender study majors at Ivy League schools. Yeah. That's the Democratic Party now. It's ivory tower. It's folks that are absolutely disconnected from what it's like to be, working class, struggling day in, day out. I would say, the types of people that take a shower at night, not in the morning. The working class people, they're not. The Democratic Party isn't listening to them anymore. They're listening to those folks that are rioting at Harvard and Yale, cheering for Hamas. They're listening to the folks like Antifa in Portland who are screaming about fascism. They're listening to folks that are saying that our borders should be absolutely open. They're not listening to someone in West Virginia that is struggling to make ends meet, or someone in rural Oregon that can't figure out where their next paycheck's going to come from. That's just not who they are anymore.
Or, and this is an interesting report, a USDA report, latest sign on impact of inflation under the 46th president. Hunger explodes on Joe's watch as 10 million more fall into food insecurity. So they might not know where their next meal is coming from thanks to inflation, because if you can't afford it, then I guess you can't buy it.
I mean, again, it speaks to the same thing. When it comes to when inflation affects things like food, that's something that if you're in the top 40% of income earners, you can absorb that a little bit. You might notice it in your bank account. I'll be honest, I certainly notice it. But if you're in that lower 60%, the price of eggs going up 30%, the price of milk going up, the things that you absolutely need, especially if you have kids, that really affects how you can spend money every month. And it gets to the point to where you have to start making hard decisions about what you can buy and what you can't buy.
Yeah, in the short run, it's a zero-sum game, and this is where the country's at. And I actually think that this is bubbling under the surface. Now, this is a good lead-in, actually, to talk about where the Republican presidential primary race is. I know that we talked last time also about the likelihood that Joe Biden will be the nominee. And I don't think anything's changed from the stuff we talked about before, because Democrats know that he's not all there, that many of them do. Some don't care and some do. Republicans and independents are overwhelmingly concerned that he isn't capable of doing what he's doing. But $81 million flowed into the bank accounts of the Biden and DNC campaigns. So there's apparently 81 million. It's interesting that's 81 million. That's how much went into how many votes they said they got in 2020. But they've got people that think that this guy is he's the cat's meow and they want to see him reelected. But now we've got a Republican primary, which is starting to peter out, right? Candidates, Mike Pence has dropped out or suspended his campaign. There's several others that have done the same. And there's two people sort of tied for second place. I think that was the poll that we talked about in Iowa, right? The Des Moines Register.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to go ahead and just be as forceful as I can when I say this. DeSantis needs to drop out. He just does. He's a bad candidate with a flawed thesis as to why he should be president. His campaign and his super PAC have spent the equivalent of like the GDP of a small island nation, and he is still just languishing in these like low to mid double digit numbers. I think in Iowa, and what's interesting about Iowa when we talk about that one specifically is DeSantis made it clear that he was all in on Iowa. He was kind of like go home or go broke with the Iowa strategy. And today we saw President Trump is at 43%. And then DeSantis and Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley has spent a fraction of what DeSantis has spent. And they're tied at 16 with just a few months before the caucuses. I don't know if, and I typically, and Kevin, you know me, I don't really like to armchair quarterback other people. Like there's always a reason that people make the decisions that they do.
Yeah.
But the DeSantis one, I mean, he is just, it is going to be a case study of what not to do when you run for president. This is going to be something that surpasses Jeb exclamation point in the history books.
Yeah.
It's just bad. And the reality is that, you know, DeSantis is in risk of coming in third place in Iowa. You know, when he was supposed to be the number one guy there, according to him and his super PAC, at best, I think he can hope for third in New Hampshire, probably even potentially even fourth in New Hampshire, depending on what poll you look at. South Carolina, again, maybe third or fourth. How do you justify a presidential campaign when you may not even come in the top two in the first three primary states in the presidential primary? And then once you get to Super Tuesday, it's all over. And the reality is that President Trump is running away with his primary left, right, and center. His numbers have gone up. His fundraising numbers have gone up. His national polling against Joe Biden has gone up.
That's a big thing.
His polling against Biden in key battleground states has gone up. The case that President Trump shouldn't be the nominee that DeSantis has been trying to lay out is being proven false time and time again. So what is he doing? And this seems like a really expensive hobby. It doesn't seem like a campaign at this point.
Yeah, and there's a few other candidates. Tim Scott's in the race, and he's saying it's Iowa or bust. We know that that's kind of what happens in these first few primary races. That's it. I mean, you got to score. You got to get points on the board. You can't just lurk around with no money, or even with money but have no traction. This is what really it comes down to, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, as far as the other candidates that I didn't mention, you know, folks like Tim Scott, Vivek, Chris Christie, Burgum, I think is still in it.
Yeah.
Those are ones that were always going to be kind of long shots that, you know, really had to like kind of ignite and do something really special and unique to kind of rise up. And they just haven't had that moment yet. And I don't know that they have the time to have that moment now. But the reason I picked on DeSantis is the entire sort of reasoning for him getting in is that he was supposed to be this person that was going to soar in the polls and raise all this money and do all this sort of stuff. I think he's had 2 or 3 campaign resets. He's laid campaign staff off. They've gone back and forth on messaging. He's flipped-flop on a couple of issues, including Ukraine. There's nothing about that campaign that is redeeming at this point. There's nothing, and I say this all the time. When I look at other consultants, I look at other media guys. For most campaigns, I can look at something and say, "Oh, wow, I wish I thought of that. That was a really clever idea." And I love to point those ideas out when they're not mine. There's not a single thing that DeSantis campaign has done or said they will do that I think like, wow, I wish I thought of that. I'm glad that I'm glad that I haven't come up with a single idea that DeSantis campaign has, because they're so bad. So bad.
Yeah, and I also think that they have spent a lot of money by people who probably aren't ready to go and put more money in, you know, what is it, throwing in good money after bad or something, which is just a reality of campaigns. It doesn't even matter whether you like a particular candidate or not. If they don't know how to run in a primary, they're not going to be good in a general at this point.
No, and that's the other thing too. I mean, if you're a DeSantis supporter or one of his spokespeople, your argument is that, well, listen, if DeSantis somehow miraculously wins this primary, he's going to do better against Biden than Trump would. But the numbers don't bear that out. The reality is, if you look at national polling, they're polling Trump versus Biden and DeSantis versus Biden, and Trump performs better versus Biden than DeSantis does. So there's not a single argument that DeSantis has made or tried to make that's come true. And you know, for those that and I obviously don't mean this as a criticism that of anyone that might be supportive of DeSantis or thinks he's a good governor. You know, I'm not trying to, you know, criticize any of your listeners, but I am trying to criticize his campaign because his campaign apparatus has failed him miserably,
Yeah.
miserably. The super PAC was poorly constructed. The strategy made no sense at all. The fact that they were when you have the super PAC leaking memos for debate prep, like it just all looked bad from the very get go. And it was and it might sound hypocritical for someone like me to say this, but it all felt and looked very consultant driven. Like you could tell that everything was overly focus grouped and overpolled. And one of the things that I always talk about in campaigns is that yes, you want to make sure you're doing your research, you're doing stuff that makes sense for for getting votes and things of that nature, but you can't lose the candidate's authenticity in that process.
No.
Because if you over focus group, if you over research, if you really just try to do something that's heavily consultant driven, voters are smart and they can tell if a candidate's being plastic or not, if they're being fake. And that's the problem that DeSantis has, is that voters understand that his campaign is plastic, as I typically say. And that's one of the biggest problems he's running into. And I just don't think he fixes it before Iowa.
Well, and that's what's ironic about it is a lot of his good image that was created out of moments of authenticity in Florida in front of media, unscripted. That's where a lot of that came from. And how does a campaign do worse than a completely unscripted moment in front of media in Florida? How can they actually fail and make things worse when that required nothing but showing up for a press conference in Florida before? And granted, national campaigning is different, but speaking to the fact that the campaign really is, his campaign apparatus has let him down.
Well, look, and I don't mean to make this, I don't want to turn your show into like the dunk on DeSantis hour, but like the last point that I'd make is, I don't know what an authentic Ron DeSantis looks like. And that's part of the problem. I mean, and an authentic Ron DeSantis might be in his basement playing Dungeons and Dragons while reading Encyclopedia Britannica, right? He could be an absolute nerd for all I know. But at this point, try to show that. I mean, whatever it is,
show the real thing.
Right. Yeah. Because voters don't want you to be perfect. They don't expect you to be great at everything. They don't expect you to be able to be a traditional politician. Again, it's one of the things that makes Donald Trump is that he does have warts, but
he's real.
There are people that love him for that.
Yeah.
DeSantis at this point, if I were in that inner circle, I would be like, let's try to figure out the most authentic thing we can have this guy do. It's not anything we've done up until this point. Everything else is felt plastic. What's the most real thing we can have this do? Is it him hanging out with his kids, his family? I don't know. But I think the reality is that even if they did that at this point, it's probably too little too late.
So speaking to the argument for nearly everybody who's been running against President Trump in the primary is that some of them have said he can't win in the general. Others say they would simply be better and you'd have a more certainty that they would be able to defeat President Biden. But here's it is the McLaughlin poll, I believe, John McLaughlin. And his poll says that President Trump now leads Joe Biden 48% to 43%, with only 9% undecided, which means that there's not a lot of people to move in either direction. Those 9% often come down to the end as either people that do pick a side but only pretty much trend the direction that things are going, or they don't vote, and become part of the error margin as to whether or not someone's a likely voter. And President Trump, according to this, is receiving 27% of the African American vote and 39% of the Hispanic vote, according to this poll. That's a huge chunk of what used to be Joe Biden voters.
Mm-hmm.
And 27% of the African American vote is absolutely catastrophic for Democrats.
Right.
That even if that were to drop by 10 percentage points, it would be an enormous blow, especially in states that Democrats have to win.
It would be. And again, there's a part of it that just kind of makes sense, right? If the Democratic Party and Joe Biden are kowtowing to the blue-haired protesters in Pioneer Square up in Portland, they're probably losing votes with lower income, working class people and that would be across ethnicities, which is why you're seeing that rise in support amongst African Americans, Hispanics, and you're also seeing that amongst working class white people as well. Like that's been going up steadily for Trump over the last couple of cycles. But one of the points I wanted to make over the McLaughlin poll you just mentioned is I think some context here is really important. 4 years ago, at this point in 2019, there wasn't a single national poll that showed Donald Trump winning the election. We were losing every national poll at this point, and then going into 2020, and then that even got worse during COVID.
And he was an incumbent president at that point.
Yeah, for an incumbent, yeah. So it's really, really telling. As we're getting ready to really go into the full force of the 2024 cycle, from a presidential perspective, from looking at that polling, we're actually starting at a better spot than we were 4 years ago, a much better spot. And that's something that I've seen a few pundits pick up on, but it's an important thing for whether you're a candidate or you're thinking about running, or you're trying to figure out what is it going to be like running in a presidential election. We're actually looking better than we did 4 years ago. And keep in mind, while we lost the presidential election in 2020, we did pick up congressional seats. We did win some stuff. So there's a lot of reasons to, as those numbers if they continue to stay the same or become favorable, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Republicans winning next year.
So let me throw a few curveballs as we kind of get close to the end here. One is this same poll did test what would happen if RFK Jr. is running as an independent. And then the numbers shifted somewhat. So Trump 39, Biden 37, RFK Jr. 14, 11% undecided. If you throw in Cornel West as an independent, it was Trump 38, Biden 35, RFK Jr. 12, Cornel West 2%, undecided 13%. What do you think about the effect that will have?
I mean, the third party candidates can have a massive effect. There are plenty of elections, that have been won or lost because of third party candidates kind of spoiling. There's a couple that I've been involved in where I've been on the winning side because of a spoiler, and I've been on the losing side because of a spoiler.
But they're all spoilers. Everybody should know that they're spoilers.
Right. And I think for now it's safe. It's Cornel West is a pretty obvious one where he's pulling almost directly from Biden. And these are mostly protest votes, folks that, just do not like Joe Biden and they do not want to cast their vote for them, but they would never vote for Donald Trump either. So Cornel West is an easy home for their vote. RFK Jr. is a much more complicated one because, and the poll kind of alluded to this, like he's kind of pulling from both a little bit, but it seems like he's pulling more from, and he was running as a Democrat, in the Democratic primary until he dropped out and decided to run independent. So it makes sense that he is pulling more from the Democrats. And again, as we get closer to the election, what's really going to matter is we'll stop talking about national polls a lot less and start talking about battleground state polls a lot more, and how RFK does in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, versus how he does in like a Georgia or an Arizona or an Ohio is going to be really interesting.
Well, and that also is the case that, RFK Jr. is not going to win probably any state, which means that it's all coming down to the zero-sum game. But isn't it also true that these protest votes, as you get closer to election day, shrink?
Yeah.
Because people are like, well, actually, I want to vote for someone who might win, not just protest.
Yeah, I mean, there's it kind of goes to a theory in political science called rational choice. When someone casts their vote, they don't want their vote to feel like it's thrown away. And there's two ways to make sure your vote, from a psychological standpoint, that your vote isn't thrown away. Some people say, I really want my vote to matter, so I'm going to vote for the person that has the best shot to win.
Yeah.
Other folks will say, I really want my vote to matter, and the way for it to matter is for me to vote for the person I think that most reflects where I am, politically.
Yeah.
Every human being is wired a little bit differently, and they'll go one way or the other. So, but you are going to have some folks that, to your point, Kevin, are like, listen, I don't think either Cornel West or RFK Jr. can win, so I'm going to vote for either Trump or Biden. It'll be interesting to see how that breaks out. Part of the other thing with RFK that's really interesting is, unlike most other third-party candidates, he does have the ability to raise large sums of money, at least for a from a party candidate perspective, he does.
Grassroots money, right?
Right, which puts him not quite, but almost, and I don't mean this as like stealing from Republicans necessarily, but almost like from like a Ross Perot standpoint,
Yeah.
and not just an also ran that no one's ever heard of, but is on the ballot, but someone that's going to have some sort of brand and identity throughout the election. And he's going to be able to say and do things that augment that vote a little bit, one way or the other.
So, last question. What the heck is Gavin Newsom doing? And what should we think about him and Kamala and this whole situation?
I don't know what he's doing. Did I see he was like playing basketball with Glenn Youngkin or something on Twitter today?
I had not seen that, but I know that he went to China as if he's an important person, and he met with the Chinese president, which is something apparently they can't arrange between Biden and Xi directly. But Gavin Newsom went out there and he kissed the ring and talked about how great it's going to be when there's a Newsom presidency. If there was a Newsom presidency, he can make these things happen right away, including the green economy, courtesy of buying everything from China.
I think he was just out there because he was trying to get a franchise for the French Laundry opened in Shanghai. That's all it was.
that's the restaurant that he the $700 a plate restaurant that he
was that too deep of a cut? Was that?
That's right. Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, gee, I guess they need better food in China because they don't have enough good Chinese food. I don't know what it is, but it would seem as if Gavin Newsom is just wanting some attention, enough to keep him in case something happens with Biden.
Again, if there's any takeaway from this show for your listeners tonight, it's two things about politicians. One, they lie, and two, they all want attention.
That's right. Yep. That's so I'm glad we could teach that lesson tonight and explain it very specifically why that's the case. Well, I think we really covered a good swath of political news across the board and celebrated our new House Speaker from your home state, fellow Tigers fan, and highlighted some of the important stuff that everybody needs to know in the coming. Are the Tigers still in the running for potentially with a college football playoff berth? Or are they
college football? So I mean, we play Alabama this weekend. I think if we beat Alabama, we have a good shot at making the SEC championship. I don't think we can lose another game because we're at 2 losses right now. So probably need some folks to lose some stuff for us to get to the college playoffs, but we'll see. As long as we beat Alabama, that's my only goalpost for this.
Actually, really, that's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, it's my alma mater, Notre Dame, took care of business this weekend against the poor Pitt folks, but we beat USC, and that actually makes a whole season. So I guess we're in the same situation. We got 2 losses. We might make it to a New Year's Day bowl. Sounds good. We'll try again next year. Glad we could lend you or send you our prior coach. It sounds like it's not been too bad, although it's nice to win championships.
It's better. It's better than I already forgot his name. The quack that we had before him. Oh my goodness!
It's funny how it leaves your mind once it's like they're gone, right? Yeah. You've moved on, but well,
anyway. That's it. Ed Orgeron.
Yeah, Ed Orgeron. Yeah, that's right. Well, anyway, it's been great having you, Dave. Thanks again for bringing us your expertise and your knowledge and angle on what is going on with political campaigns so that people can understand what's working, what doesn't, and where it's all heading for next year. Really appreciate you having on once again, and we'll revisit again as we go further into the election season.
Sounds good. Have a great night.
Have a great night, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night on the next episode of The Captive Audience. Should be David and I back covering the news and unique opinion that you can't find anywhere